I had two childhoods, one before the Nazis came into power and one after. I was 10 years old when the Nazis came into power. Before that, I had a very beautiful childhood. We were middle-class people. We vacationed a lot, and we lived in a nice apartment. And the Nazis came in. I had my second childhood, which was not so good because all of a sudden I couldn't go where I wanted to go. My family's situation deteriorated very quickly, both financially and psychologically. And we had to move into a very substandard apartment because we got evicted on no notice because they didn't want any more Jews in the house. The first bad experience was the burning of books, actually. One day, the citizens in our town all met at a public square, and there was a huge bonfire, and I happened to be walking by there and saw them burning books with a lot of hoopla and all that, and mainly books written by Jewish authors and books that did not exactly follow the political party line. One day going home from school, I saw some young Nazis having some Jewish men in the middle of the street, forcing them to clean the streets with toothbrushes, much to a lot of laughter and carrying on. And of course, one of the most intimidating part were the placards and the posters on every street corner warning people of associating with Jews, and that Jews had brought about the bad financial situation, and on and on and on. And of course, I used to have a lot of kids that I played with after it got dark at night. When nobody could see us, I would go to their apartments and we would play together. But we were basically very ostracized from society. Well, my father was arrested twice, actually. My mother and I couldn't figure out why my father wasn't coming home. We went to the train station, waiting every train for 3 days, and never found my father. And after 3 days, he came back and he told us a whole story of what had taken place. He said this young man accused my father of having made statements against the government. He was arrested, he was put in jail, but this was in the early time of the Nazi era, and they still had courts and judges. So he went before a judge, and lo and behold, the accuser's father testified on behalf of my father. So the judge was in a pickle. He didn't know what to do. And he said, look, if I do nothing, I'll lose my job. What I'm going to ask you to do, simply don't come back to our town so they think I sent you off to a concentration camp. And which was a mixed blessing. My father did not get into a concentration camp. On the other hand, it really affected our financial situation, and it went down very quickly. Well, my parents sensed that something had to be done, so they applied for me to get a visa to a number of places, and the visas just did not come through. Because what people don't understand, in the early period of the Nazi era, there was no problem getting out of Germany. The problem was getting admitted into other countries. So when the Nazis invaded Austria in 1938, someone went to President Roosevelt and asked him to issue some visas to let some children come into the United States. And under this program, 1,200 children were admitted. And the social worker in our town called us one day and said they could get me a visa to the United States, but I had to be packed and ready to leave within 24 hours. So I had 24 hours to say goodbye, to pack, and get used to the idea of leaving my father and mother. And then we packed and walked to the train station. We were not allowed to use public transportation anymore, so we had to walk, quite a walk, with our luggage to the train station. And they put me on the train, and I quickly went to the window and saw them waving at me. And as the train pulled out, they got smaller and smaller. I think my parents realized that it was a final goodbye, but I had hoped, young children have hopes that I could bring them to the United States, because the minute I got to Birmingham, I was sponsored by a Jewish women's organization in Birmingham, Alabama. The minute I came to Birmingham, I was only 14 years old, but I went to some of the elders in the community and asked them if they could provide me with an affidavit to bring my parents over. I had no idea how difficult it would be, and that I would not be able to succeed. Every letter was censored. I never got a letter from my mother or father where something wasn't physically cut out by the censors. And of course, she could not say anything against the government. It was very unusual and very frightening. My father's second arrest occurred on November 9th, 1938, which was Crystal Night or Kristallnacht. I was already in the United States. He was arrested and taken to a Gestapo jail where he was beaten up very severely. When he got out, he needed hospitalization, but was unable to get into a hospital until a few days later, when he finally died from his wounds. I was very upset, very bitter, and I wanted to be a good American. And I tried to get in the Army, and I couldn't get in because I came to the United States with a German passport, which classified me as an enemy alien. So I filed a presidential appeal, and in June of 1943, I was able to join the Army. We went over to England and joined the 30th Infantry Division, and we actually were part of the Normandy invasion forces landing on Omaha Beach. Later, I became a forward observer, and towards the end of the war, I became a counterintelligence agent because of my ability to speak German. The most horrible situation that I encountered was close to the end of the war in May of 1945. I was looking for a good place for gun positions for artillery when I suddenly encountered this horrible smell and odor and stink, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. So we drove a little further, and we found an abandoned freight train full of Jewish people being shipped from one camp to another. And these people were an unbelievable sight, human living skeletons in the worst shape that you can imagine. They'd been in these cars for several days without food, without a little bit of water, certainly no sanitary facilities. standing room only, 60 to 70 people in a car, and you can imagine they didn't even resemble normal human beings. I never gave any thought to how old they were because they all looked so bad you didn't know if they were old, young, or otherwise. I was in a helpless position because I couldn't share any food. I had no food to share. I had nothing to give them, nothing to help them with. And it was the most helpless feeling I ever had in my life. I wanted to do something, couldn't do anything. And then a little later, just 2 or 3 days later, again we were on our way to Magdeburg, and we passed ditches of dead people for miles and miles. People who were on a forced march from the eastern zone to the western zone, from one concentration camp to another. And rather than let the Americans liberate them, the Germans shot them and left them dead along the highway. It was a horrible, awful experience. Later, through my professional connection, I got involved with the Southern Regional Council, which was the first organization to work against segregation in the South. We were actually responsible for having the first black policeman here in Atlanta. I went to Berlin many years later after the war, and we went to an archive, and I was stunned that every bit of information was available. I went to an archive and to check on some of my mother's siblings who lived in Berlin, and it was so detailed. It showed the day they were picked up, what assembly area they were taken to, the number of the train that took them to Auschwitz, the day they were killed. I mean, every little detail is in these archives, and there's still people who say it didn't happen. It's mind-boggling. Well, people have to understand that these kind of things are still going on in the world, and we are doing very little about it. If all of us would strive to make this a better world and to get along, this will never happen again.